Hi, Chris Goettl from Ivanti here. Today I'd like to talk to you about continuous vulnerability management, striving for a 14-day SLA. To start the conversation, I'd like to talk a little bit about the changing security landscape. Threat actors are constantly evolving and changing their tactics, so identifying what they're doing helps us to understand better how to react to and respond to cyber threats. So starting off, let's talk a little bit about some of the ransomware trends that we're seeing right now. If you look at ransoms paid in 2019, the average ransom went from just shy of $7,000 in 2018 up to nearly 84,000, a little over 84,000 in 2019. That was a 1,150% increase year over year in the ransoms paid. Q1 2020 saw a drastic increase once again, so yet another 33% increase over the end of 2019 ransom average was increased again in Q1 2020. This now has brought up the ransoms paid up to $111,000 on average. This can be directly attributed to tactics of threat actors and how they've increased the amount of pain, therefore increasing the amount they can request for a ransom. So this is because they're now doing a ransomware attack plus a data exfiltration. The expected result then is they not only have one lever on you, which is ransoming all your devices and preventing you from using those. And if you don't have a good backup and recovery process, you don't have the ability to recover your systems, but also the fact that they've now stolen a copy of your data as well. So if you fix one problem, you still have to deal with the fact that they could go public with or sell your data as well. So they're extorting that higher ransom. If we also look at typical vulnerability trends, these statistics are taken from two different reports. The first two are taken from a report from the RAND Institute. The average life expectancy for a vulnerability exploit is about 7 years. That means once exploited, threat actors are going to continue to use an exploit of a vulnerability for many years to come. So this means we have to be diligent about what vulnerabilities are being maintained in our environment, not just with the view of what's just come out recently. The other stat from the RAND Institute is the 22 days median time to develop a functional exploit. That means from release of an update, a threat actor can take about 22 days on average to be able to develop a functional exploit. So within 22 days from a release, they get a functional exploit and they continue to use that effectively against us for up to 7 years. This basically portrays kind of a significant challenge in the vulnerability space, which is the fact that we have a difficult time managing vulnerabilities. Not only do we have to move very quickly to plug them before threat actors start using them, but we also have the fact that the average vulnerability is being continually reused by threat actors for a very long period of time. Now, most exploits are going to occur within the first 14 to 28 days of release of a patch. This statistic came from the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report in 2016. So this is showing, again, how quickly threat actors move. They're oftentimes going to have created several functional exploits within that 14 to 28 day time frame. By the time it gets out to 60 days, that percentage goes up to 90%. So the majority of exploits that are going to be created happen very quickly, and then they'll continue to use those against us for several years to come. That means that there's a lot of holes in our vulnerability management program. All right, so let's talk about some of the challenges to vulnerability management. Threat actors are out there. The ransomware attacks are getting more painful for us, but not necessarily changing the tactics happening under the hood. Threat actors are still exploiting a vulnerability, spreading themselves out. They may be doing a combination of phishing attacks or brute force attacks of other types as well in combination there, compromising credentials, using those against us. But a significant portion of what they're doing to move about our environment still involves exploit of vulnerabilities at several levels in the process. So let's talk about that vulnerability management process. This is actually taken from a Gartner report that was put out talking about the vulnerability lifecycle. Now, the way that Gartner portrayed this, they were trying to break down different stages in the process. What they actually ended up doing was actually predicting where the pain points also are in this process. the process overall is fairly fragmented and looks very much like this as well. So the security team is going to go in and run assessments using a vulnerability management solution. There's going to be some level of prioritization. Some vulnerability management solutions have built-in prioritization. Other situations, you might be using a SIM or a threat intelligence platform to aggregate a number of different security metrics or pieces of metadata and prioritizing in some other stack. When you want to get to the point where you need to take action, remediation typically comes in the form of software deployments, updates to patches to the environment. Mitigation may also be things like registry changes or config changes. So this is the operations team, and this is typically endpoint management and patch management solutions that are delivering this stage. Then we go back to reassess. Now we've returned to the security team and the vulnerability management systems, and then we have to continue to look at and improve our process. Okay, so we've now got multiple teams in play. We've got fragmented processes that go across multiple technology stacks. Stakeholders are not very well integrated in this process as well. And if we don't engage well with them during this process, they'll become a barrier rather than a facilitator, which will also elongate how long this process takes. And believe me when I say this is a race. All right, so let's talk first about those different teams involved. When you have multiple teams involved, we have to coordinate very closely. Otherwise, oftentimes you end up with this type of scenario. We end up throwing the tasks or data or information over the wall and saying, here's what needs to be done, good luck. Well, if the security team does the vulnerability assessment, they go and prioritize those and hand it off to operations. If there's not a fluid transfer of information, if there isn't collaboration occurring, that process is going to end with this operations team spending a lot of time and effort to go and research, try to figure out what to do, and in the end, come back with gaps in the resolutions or having missed certain things entirely. So how hard can that handoff really be? Well, the reality is each time you do a vulnerability assessment, that could contain tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of detected CVEs. The operations team, when they get it, they need to deduplicate that and then go and research those CVEs to figure out exactly what action needs to be taken for each one. This, on average, takes most organizations 5 to 8 hours every time that handoff occurs. That's, again, if we're looking at a 14-day SLA, that's already one full day of time lost just in prioritization of that. This actually doesn't have to be that difficult. In a strictly data exercise, this can actually be mapped and processed in under a minute. We have the ability to do this with our technology today. The problem that most organizations have is they haven't automated that handoff. The next challenge I want to talk about is how are you prioritizing your updates? You can see here, this is a report from Recorded Futures. This was the top 10 vulnerabilities being exploited in 2019. Now, a couple of interesting things about this. You'll look on here and you'll see that going back to our 7-year shelf life, most of these vulnerabilities were not first identified in 2019. We've got several from 2018, 2017, 2015, all the way back to 2012. So that 7-year shelf life definitely plays out here. Threat actors are going to continue to get use out of vulnerabilities. So we're missing something in our prioritization. There's a gap here. And there's some additional challenges that I'd like to highlight as well. These two updates here, they were only rated by Microsoft as important when they were released. Yet they're one of the top exploited vulnerabilities. So the way that we're evaluating these could be missing some pretty significant vulnerabilities in our process. So let's go through a couple other examples. These 3 CVEs also were 0 days being exploited on the day that the update was released, and they also were only rated as important. The CVSS score, if you're on the security side, that CVSS base score is trying to give a risk level to those. In all 3 of those cases, it was under an 8.0. It was actually either a 7.0 or a 7.5 on the CVSS scale. So risk-based prioritization. We need to go beyond some of the basic prioritization. We need to also look at other metrics like known exploited. These are the low-hanging fruit that threat actors are going to continually use against us going forward. We can also look at high-risk applications and basically treat them with a zero-tolerance policy. If you look on here, there's a pretty solid set of products that are being represented. We've got Internet Explorer, we've got Office, and Flash Player. Yeah, that's on its way out, but it's still hanging around. So come December, you really want that out of your environment because it's still one of the top exploited vulnerability or applications out there. So that type of analysis can help us point out some areas. If you have exceptions, a lot of times a vulnerability is still existing in your environment because an exception was made. Review those exceptions. Revisit those exceptions. Those exceptions could be the door that's being held open for a threat actor to keep using an active exploit against you for 7+ years. And then end-of-life applications. Many of these applications, a lot of times when an end of life comes around, we're all dealing with this right now with Windows 7, Server 2008. Reportedly, there are as many as 25% of Windows desktops and laptops are still running Windows 7. It's a pretty significant number considering we're all the way into the latter part of 2020, and the end of life has been going on since January. So prioritization, reevaluate how you're prioritizing. Expanding out. So we've talked about prioritization. We talked about the processes of approvals and testing and things like that also need to be evaluated. These are the other things that can bottleneck in your environment. How are you evaluating and including people into your test groups? Engage with your business line owners. Find their subject matter experts. Engage them in your pilot groups. A lot of the reasons why your system owners or application owners or business line owners become a barrier to updates is because updates break your environment. If you engage with those SMEs from each of those groups, if they're in your pilot group and you're able to start updating them immediately, you can engage with them, find out if there's issues, get those issues resolved, and deploy to the rest of the group with very minimal impact. And by doing so, you get those stakeholders engaged in the process instead of becoming that barrier to say, no, you can't patch my systems this month. We're in the middle of whatever cycle they're in. No, you got to do it in a different window. All the things that typically start to push back and become delays, which end up make us miss that 14-day SLA. Look for ways to identify those bottlenecks, automate them, work through them with process, include your service management process in the overall process. You can automate a lot of this by engaging the right way with these different pieces. So how do we achieve that 14-day SLA? One thing we need to do is we need to focus on a solid security framework. At Ivanti, we focus a lot of attention around the CIS top 5. Mitigation or elimination of 85% of modern cyber threats can be achieved by doing the CIS top 5 effectively. Think of this as your basic cyber hygiene. In fact, that's how they describe the first 6 controls actually in their environment. But this basic cyber hygiene helps us to eliminate the majority of the ways that threat actors are coming at us. The first 2 controls, 1 and 2 there, inventory of authorized and unauthorized devices, inventory of authorized and unauthorized software. This is discovery and asset management. Actually, underneath number 2 there, also you have application control, the allow block list. If I've got a way to authorize only approved software in my environment, I all of a sudden remove several tricks from threat actors' bags. Most malware will not be able to run. Most of tools that they're going to use against us are going to be taken out of their tool bag. Continuous vulnerability assessment and remediation. These are put in order of priority. Number 1 is your top priority. Each one of these becomes more effective if you've done the one before it well. Number 3 on the list is the vulnerability management. Now, that doesn't mean it's less important than 1 or 2, but what 1 and 2 deliver is I know what's in my environment. I know what's running on the systems in my environment. Now I can identify vulnerabilities and secure it. If I haven't done 1 and 2, 3 will ultimately start with failure as the ultimate end because I don't know everything about my environment. So once I get those 3 stages, I need to continuously monitor and reevaluate and resolve those vulnerabilities as they come up. Privilege management, another key piece of the overall process of protecting your environment. A layered approach to security is best. Privileges are going to be used to basically provide the threat actors with the way that they're going to move about your environment without you noticing. They're going to get in, land on one system, and then use privilege management to compromise a credential in your environment, and then use your own system tools against you. So at that point, they're able to move around the environment with little to no chance of being detected. So we need to be able to block that and control who has admin rights, who has the ability to use system tools, and monitor that. Secure configuration. Not as many vulnerabilities occur here, but think about in the last couple of years here, we've had a lot of vulnerabilities in SSL and TLS, which basically those cipher suites and protocols had to be end of life to be able to protect our environments better. So SSL 3, TLS 1.0 and 1.1 are now shelved, and we're on to TLS 1.2. Those are configuration changes that we need to make in the environment to better secure ourselves. A security framework like this is going to help you prioritize and focus your execution. This doesn't mean that regulatory compliance is not a requirement. What this does, that regulatory frameworks like PCI, HIPAA, and others do not do for you, is it gives you a roadmap to success. It prioritizes activities to give you the biggest effect on protecting your environment. All right, so let's slightly change the way that we're talking about that. This gives it a slightly different narrative to better understand how we're going to go about securing our environment. 3 stages: sensing, the ability to discover devices, detect what's running on those devices, and continually monitor for change. Prioritization, making sure that we understand risk, not just some basic severity, but actual risk to our environment. Getting to a point where machine learning and other capabilities can help us even predict what needs to be done next. So if I know what your environment was like next month, I get new patches coming out, I can actually predict the next actions you should take. These 2 activities together give you a significant noise reduction to focus on the activities that are most important and take out the things like that average shelf life of an exploit, being able to be reused constantly. Those exploits that threat actors are getting a lot of reuse out of, we're going to pull those out of the equation so they don't have that luxury. Remediation, the most important part. If I tell you you've got a billion problems, that's all fine and good. But if I can help you solve a million problems, suddenly we've got a recipe for success. Proactive, make sure that your processes are ready to go. And once updates release, you're able to start assessing and move towards remediation as quickly as possible. Adaptive. In 2020, we've had the entire shift to remote work. This was a pretty significant change for all of us. Very important to be able to adapt to security scenarios like that. Automation. There's no better way to trim the edges off of a SLA like this than to automate steps that currently you're doing manually. How do we automate prioritization? How do we automate research being done? How do we automate the process of delegation of what systems need to be patched, the changes that need to be made, the window they're going to be patched in, and the approval process around that. So this is that complete vulnerability lifecycle. The ability to go from vulnerability assessment to patch remediation, provide workflows, automation, and visibility to enable the business to achieve a 14-day SLA. This is where we need to shift to get ahead of threat actors. So let's go through a couple examples of success. This first one, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. They've been working on this for a few years. You could see that their first binding operational directive was back in 2015. This announced to all Department of Homeland Security agencies that they needed to achieve a 30-day SLA on vulnerability remediation. This year, they threw down and they declared that they were going to shift towards a 15-day SLA to fix vulnerabilities. Sorry, 2019, they made this declaration. So they've been working towards this for many years. Their methodology is top-down. It's a policy change. Non-compliance means systems are taken out of the network. A pretty harsh line to draw on that, but one that's been working effectively to drive all of those agencies towards a better secure environment. This next one is a global manufacturer, very well-known household name, 80,000 endpoints they're managing globally. They have a 14-day SLA, and they continually meet that on a regular basis. The things that they've done to be successful, they've partnered with the business. They're engaged with those business line owners. They've included those subject matter experts as the pilot users in the process. And they've made it a part of their corporate culture. This next example is another well-known retailer. Global retailer, household name, you definitely recognize them. 66,000 endpoints managed globally. They have a target 14-day SLA for remediation of security vulnerabilities for their servers. They also have a weekly remediation target for endpoints. Again, they achieve this by partnering with the business, security and operations running in parallel, tight engagement with pilot users in both stores and backend to make sure that they're getting a good coverage of testing, and ensuring that they've made this part of their corporate culture. Standardization of software made them a lot more efficient at delivering this as well, with less one-offs and other issues with third-party issues, third-party software that they had to deal with. So a couple of key takeaways as we wrap up. Build your security roadmap around a well-developed security framework like the CIS framework. Ask yourself, how accurate is your discovery and asset management program? Because threat actors, they've got great reconnaissance. If you didn't find it, chances are they will. Evaluate your vulnerability assessment and prioritization. What metrics are you using, and are they accurate enough? If you're only using things like vendor critical or a CVSS score of 8 and above, I showed you several examples, and there's even more out there of how that will miss some exploited vulnerabilities. Remember that vulnerabilities, most exploits are going to occur within 14 to 24 days of release of an update. What's your time to patch? How do you bring your SLA to that 14-day mark to get ahead of the majority of the risk that's going to affect your environment? And then continually review that security strategy and strive to improve it wherever possible. Thank you.